Hook, F-R-S-T, 10 seconds, USA and UK audience. Narrator, calm, intriguing. Have you ever lived surrounded by people, yet felt completely alone? Before this story begins, take a second and subscribe to the channel, because stories like this remind us that sometimes the smallest moments, an unanswered message, a missed glance, a quiet choice, can change an entire life forever. Title: Surrounded Yet Alone. Chapter 1. The Noise That Hid the Silence. Ethan Walker lived in the middle of everything and the center of nothing at all, in a city that never slept, and an apartment that echoed too loudly when he came home at night. A modern glass tower overlooking busy streets filled with car horns, flashing lights and crowds that moved like waves without ever noticing the man standing still among them. And every morning he woke to alarms, emails, headlines and voices, yet felt the same hollow quiet settle into his chest before he even touched the floor. Because loneliness doesn't always arrive with silence. It often hides inside noise, and Ethan had learned to smile automatically at co-workers, nod politely in elevators, answer "I'm good" when asked how he was doing, even though no one waited long enough to hear anything else. And he worked a respectable job, paid his bills on time, owned a comfortable couch no one ever sat on with him, and spoke to his parents once a week with rehearsed updates that never mentioned the growing weight he carried, the kind you don't see in mirrors but feel most clearly late at night when the city dims and you realize you haven't truly been seen in years. And the strange part was that Ethan wasn't always like this. There was a time when laughter came easily, when friendships felt solid, when love seemed possible. But life doesn't usually break you all at once. It does it quietly, through unanswered calls, postponed plans, people drifting away without confrontation, until one day you look around and realize you are surrounded by people and still completely alone. Chapter 2. The Message That Shouldn't Have Mattered. It was a Tuesday evening when everything shifted, though Ethan didn't know it at the time because big changes rarely announce themselves loudly, and he was riding the subway home scrolling aimlessly through his phone when a notification appeared from a number he didn't recognize. A simple message that read, "Is this still Ethan Walker? Sorry if I've got the wrong number." And under normal circumstances he might have ignored it like all the others. Spam calls, wrong numbers, marketing texts. But something about the hesitation in the sentence made him pause, and he replied with a brief, "Yes, this is Ethan," expecting nothing. Yet moments later a response arrived explaining that her name was Clara, that she'd been given his number years ago by mistake, that she found it written on an old notebook while cleaning, and that she debated for hours whether to send the message at all. And Ethan found himself smiling at his screen, surprised by the warmth of such a small interaction, because no one debated contacting him anymore, and the conversation flowed in an easy, unforced way that felt unfamiliar, drifting from harmless jokes to quiet confessions about work stress, loneliness, and the strange feeling of living life on autopilot. And by the time Ethan reached his apartment, the silence didn't feel as heavy as it usually did, and that night, for the first time in months, he didn't fall asleep with the television on to drown out his thoughts. Chapter 3. Connection Without a Face. Days turned into weeks, and Clara became part of Ethan's daily routine in a way that felt both comforting and dangerous, because she knew things about him that no one else did, not his co-workers, not his old friends, not even his family, and they spoke about fears they'd never voiced out loud, about dreams they once had and quietly buried, about the exhaustion of pretending to be fine. And what unsettled Ethan most was how deeply she seemed to understand him without ever seeing his face, without knowing his posture, his expressions, or the way he rubbed his hands together when nervous, and he began to wonder whether real connection required presence at all, or if it was simply about being heard. And when he suggested meeting in person, Clara hesitated longer than usual, finally admitting that she wasn't sure she was ready, that she'd spent years being invisible, even when standing in rooms full of people, and that anonymity felt safer than expectation. And Ethan agreed to wait, even though part of him feared that waiting meant losing her entirely, but something inside told him this connection mattered, that it wasn't coincidence, and the twist he didn't see coming was how much his world would begin to revolve around someone he had never met, because loneliness doesn't disappear when you find someone. It transforms, and sometimes it makes you afraid of losing what you've barely found. Chapter 4. The Day Everything Fell Apart. The message came on a Friday afternoon, short and uncharacteristic, telling Ethan that Clara wouldn't be able to talk anymore, that life had become complicated, that some things were better left unfinished, and Ethan stared at the screen, waiting for more, waiting for an explanation, but none came, and hours passed, then days. And the silence returned sharper than before, cutting deeper because now it carried the memory of connection, and Ethan realized how fragile human bonds really are, how easily they can vanish without closure, and he questioned everything, whether he imagined the closeness, whether he depended too much on someone he never met, whether loneliness had tricked him into mistaking attention for meaning, and he sank into routines again, colder this time, more guarded, until one rainy evening months later, when he stepped into a small bookstore to escape the weather, and heard a laugh that stopped him mid-step, a laugh he had never heard before yet somehow recognized. And when he turned, there she was, standing near the counter holding the same notebook she once mentioned. And in that moment, Ethan understood the cruel irony of life, that the person who knew him best had been living in the same city all along. Chapter 5. The Truth About Being Seen. Clara looked just as startled as Ethan felt, and the conversation that followed was awkward, emotional, and painfully honest, because she explained that she disappeared not out of indifference but fear of being vulnerable, fear of meeting someone who truly saw her, fear of repeating past wounds, and Ethan admitted his own fault, how he let loneliness turn her into his emotional lifeline, how he avoided rebuilding real-world connections because hiding behind a screen felt safer, and what followed wasn't a dramatic declaration of love but something quieter and more powerful, a decision to start slowly, imperfectly, in the real world, understanding that connection isn't about constant presence or perfect timing but about showing up honestly when it matters. And as they walked out into the rain together, surrounded by people rushing past without noticing them, Ethan realized the truth he'd been missing all along. Being surrounded by people doesn't make you less lonely, but being truly seen by just one person can change everything. Final CTA for YouTube, narrator. If this story made you feel something, if you've ever felt invisible in a crowded world, subscribe to the channel. More stories are coming, and the next one might feel uncomfortably close to home.